What's up, everybody? We haven't got much light in here. We've had gray day after gray day after gray day and rain, rain, rain. And not only that, but we've also turned off a bunch of electricity. Well, I shouldn't say a bunch. We shot one breaker off, and it worked out to be basically everything involved with what we're working on, which was handy, but also weird. We haven't got any lights other than the windows. So, what's up? What's happening? Basically, we can see now that joists that start on this side of the house come over and stop right on the wall for the stairwell on this side. Joists that are on this side of the house come over and stop on this wall for the stairwell on this side. And right along there was a wall here, and right along there was a wall here that came out, jumped over, and continued. And that's all bearing wall, not really this so much, but this as well. And so you can see here, since we took this bearing wall out, we've got this little beam in here holding these joists up. You can see these joists from the right-hand side come over and stop here. I'm sorry for the light, but stop, stop there. And it's pretty common. So, I mean, you don't have a 24-foot 2x8, you throw them over this way, throw them over that way, and so long as they reach all the way across. I mean, this is a really short, robust area here from bearing to bearing. I mean, this isn't even 6 feet. Well, maybe it's 6 or 7 feet. Anyway, this is about 10 over here, and this will be 12 or 14 in this direction. So the problem is we don't want anything underneath here anymore. Starting at the face of the stairwell, we want it to be clear through like this. So we have to get under, or apparently a hold of, these joists. And if you saw the first video series that I ever did on removing a load bearing wall, we're going to do basically the same thing here. We're going to get a beam, and we're going to notch these joists right along for the beam, and we're going to go right in. We're going to go 2 layers of LVL wide, given that it's 7 1/4 tall to fit in this floor system for a 2x8 floor system and be flush and not sticking down. So as you want to stay shorter in height, you can add width. And for this here, we only need the 2 layers. And so we can notch and come through. Now the location of the notch is based on a few things. We've only got this much joist from the left. From the right, it goes all the way to here. So it's hard to see. I've covered the ends of them up, I guess. The ones on the right stop right there. So we're going to need to do it somewhere between the ends of the one-hand side and the ends on the other-hand side. That's our window where we're going to do a notch, because that will mean that once we put a notch in, we do have the end of both of those joists to put a joist hanger on there. So beyond that little window, we've got to put the ends of that beam on something. Now we're going to continue to have this bathroom wall here, so anywhere within that window we could set the beam on the double top plate for this wall, and we could be assured that like the other headers, I guess I smashed them all out of here, everything else is built correctly for the time period anyway in here. And so I'll assume, since I didn't want to pull all the drywall or wall board off of here and add that cost and time of taking it away and putting it back, I'm going to assume that this is well constructed here, and we're going to set our beam on that top plate somewhere. So we can go either way there too. So the last factor is, where do we go with the other end of it? We only have one choice on this end. We have to be on top of this wall. And really, it's an ideal situation because, like we looked at the beginning of the series, this wall is right on the carrying beam in the basement. So we're going to be right on those jack columns on that I-beam. We're going to be coming up in this here, and we're going to go right up and on top of it. This used to have a header, so this has a jack stud. He's right there in the wall, and then we have a king stud. Now up here, we're looking at the end right here of what I would call a header. It's a pair, or a beam. It's a pair of timber that goes from this wall to this wall and maintains the end, upstairs. It carries this little short wall that she's got here, and creates, the edge, basically a rim joist. It probably didn't even need to be doubled, but it was. Anyway, that's just a pencil line, by the way. It's not a crack. And I'll prove it. But anyway, that actually is a little crack right there, but that's been there. So the point is, we got to be up on this end. Now, I could pull this all down, and, because we're going to be up on the pair of top plates up here, we're going to sit on there. And the reason I pointed this beam out is because we can't go any farther over than that. He's on more than half of the top plate, so maybe we could take one LVL past the end of him, but the other one's going to run into him and stop. And so given that, we don't need to really add any lumber beyond here because we won't be on top of that. I thought about putting a king in the wall here, going from there all the way to the floor. It'd be opening up the wall. I'm trying to save cutting any of this open because it's a fully finished, you know, bulkhead, and it's got trim all around and trim that runs up the stairway. It would just be a really unwise decision to get in there. So I'm just going to install, I'm going to clean this and make sure it's nice and flat. I'm going to install a little block of 2x4 to get us up to the double sole plate. And when he's in there, then I'll cut the end of the double sole plate off flush, and that will be the ledge that we set the end of the beam on. And from there we can project with our tape measure and our chalk line a nice straight aligned notch on and snap on the bottom of these joists. And like in my first video series I showed you, you can put a speed square on that line and translate the line up the sides of the joists, up both sides, and then you have a nice clear line to cut with the Sawzall, and we'll come and zip, 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 we'll cut all that back. So I bet you we'll get all of that before we come back on video, and we'll be looking at a notch right from the end of this right on down all the way along, and this being prepared to set the beam on there. And then I'd like to think that I can somehow get, because it's going to be longer than this space is wide, because we want to be over onto that wall by at least 3 or 4 inches, and we want to be up onto this by a couple of inches, if not 3 or 4 over here. And so we're going to have to find a way. I may have to put in like 2/3 the length of one half and 2/3 the length of the other. I'll be all like scissors passing each other, and then send them, you know, down as far as I want them, and nail them all together right there, and then add the 1/3 left on one side, the 1/3 left on the other side, and manufacture the beam up in place. You know, unlike the first video series we did, we were able to put the end of it in the wall and then pick the other end, you know, up and build our bearing column underneath. Since we're working with an existing bearing under both ends, we're going to have to play a little game with putting it together up in the space. And then you're relying on the nail shear strength so that it doesn't scissor and do what these joists would likely do if we put, you know, the danger that we have to avoid is taking everything out from underneath these joists, and they would just fall down some like scissors and kind of be tearing on the nails that's holding them together. And so we are doing about the same thing with this beam, but we're going to nail it all up appropriately to code, and we should be in far better shape there. And then we'll slide, we'll take the little tails that are cut off from joists that don't need to be up there anymore. We'll knock them all down, and then we'll put the real ends of all the joists in a nice joist hanger and attach it to the joist and the beam there. And then then we can take this stuff all out too. It's kind of a typical snafu. These lifting shores, I could buy shorter ones. I keep putting it off. They only just barely fit in here with you know, some lumber on top to make a beam, and I had to have something on the floor to spread the load out. I can't be putting a 6-inch, certainly not on the tile, but I wouldn't want to do it on the a 6-inch square steel plate on the hardwood either, or we'd have like a witness mark from, or we'd have broken the tile or something. So we had to have nearly a couple inches of thickness underneath, and I shut them all the way down, and we ended up with only being able to use 2x4 for a beam. And I'd really like to, you know, I could have just used 2 shores. That's where I'm going with this. If we could have had 2x6 or 2x8, I wouldn't have worried about this having a belly, which would not have fallen down without this shore, but it would have been incorrectly holding these ends, and they would have all been fastened to the joist incorrectly, and then we come back with drywall and we have like a belly in the ceiling or what have you. We've got to have this nice and flat. So because we could only get 3 2x4s in here, and you know, because I didn't want to cantilever much more out of the end than 16 or 18 inches or so, I had to add a third one in the middle, and I only own 4, so we don't have 2, certainly not 3, to put up over here in this same way and demo all this stuff out and just be working around these. So we're going to use these on this side, get the beam in, make everybody copacetic attached to the beam. Then that will be doing its job, and ostensibly we can take these down as well as demo all this out, and then we'll make sure that we've got what we need in here. Now, worst case scenario, if I don't like, I was thinking this here, if I wanted to add something, I could do the same thing. I could mirror this at that time. I could get my shores underneath the joists over here in this room, just like I've set them up here, and when we take this down, or pick it back up a little bit if it's saggy, you know, nothing's going to fall right down on our heads here. It's just going to start cracking the ceiling and give us a little bit of an idea that we haven't got what we need. But then we can get under, and we can put a beam in from this corner here, right on top of this. We can notch, and we can notch all the joists right along and sit on the end of this stairwell wall as well with another pair of LVLs for not very much money or time spent either. And then we've got a really robust middle section again, and we'll have just what we've always had before, this much of a span to appropriate bearing here on our new beam rather than our old wall. And again, the same span over to this location, to here anyway, which was just fine, you know, to there. The one thing would be challenging is adding this much length to this span because the house does jump out over there. So this length was always supported to there, and now we'd be asking it to be just supported right in here. So we're asking for another 4 or 5 feet out of it. All in all, I'm fairly confident that we're not going to run into a lot of problems here. Worst case scenario, we could throw one more beam up here. We could pack this down with 2x4, notch them out again, and go across through here with a pair of LVL, where they used to be here, or even over there. We could do it from one joist to another joist in a pair of hangers and box that out like you would for, well, like I did above those kitchen cabinets last year for those people who had plumbing that needed to be in there, and like you do for a stairwell in other cases. You can always kind of, well, not always, but in a lot of cases, you can jump across a few joists with a pair of joists into a hanger on both ends. And if you do that in 2 places or wherever you do that, from there to the far end of the joist that's in the middle, you can just be taken down because he's kind of redundant at that point. So now we're in the weeds a little bit, but the fact is we are loving it. Things are shaping up, and when we come back, we'll be thinking about putting a beam in. Thanks for watching. We'll see you.